I think today's announcement is entirely inconsequential and also critical. I think we're pretty jaded about announcements nowadays. Like there's been a lot of announcements, over the past 10 or 15 years about new and fantastic things. I think what really matters is what are the actual muscle movements that we have seen leading up to the announcement? And now what are the things that we are going to see rolling out of it?
This is the Expert Series podcast from the CDA Institute, Canada's premier defense and security think tank. I'm Josh Malm, and it's Friday, October 10th, 2025.
Today, I'm very proud to announce the Defence Investment Agency. The goal or aim of this agency is to equip the Canadian Armed Forces with the tools and equipment they need at the speed of relevance, bringing Canadian industry into the tent to stimulate our own economy and to create good-paying jobs for Canadians. We're going to continue to build out our defense relationships and security relationships with like-minded countries.
Yesterday, as part of wider efforts to streamline defense procurement, Prime Minister Carney and the Liberal government launched a defense investment agency tasked with accelerating the purchase and delivery of essential military equipment. The DIA aims to ensure that the CAF receives what it needs with minimal delay, while also promoting domestic industry growth. The agency's creation comes at a time when Canada is seeking to diversify its defense partnerships with allies. The agency has been established in response to long-standing inefficiencies and delays within Canada's defense procurement system. For years, the Canadian military has faced frustrations over slow and convoluted processes, while much of the country's defense spending has been going to the United States. The DIA aims to address these challenges by centralizing procurement decisions, reducing reliance on foreign suppliers, and ensuring a stronger, more self-sufficient Canadian defense sector. Today on the pod to discuss the new agency, Canada's defense industrial base, and diversification of defense suppliers, including Canada's involvement in Rearm Europe, we're joined by Wendy Gilmour, Jeff Tasseron, and Ugurhan Berkok. This is the Expert Series. I'm joined by Wendy Gilmour, who is here to round out this week's podcast discussion. Wendy, thanks so much again for coming on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So earlier today, as you'll know, the Liberal government announced the creation of a new defense investment agency to expedite procurement, build up an investment in the CAF. I'm wondering if you can walk us through what the impetus behind such an agency was and what it might aim to do. And from your perspective and from our current vantage point, what we anticipate its implications could be.
Great. Well, thank you very much again for the opportunity to speak to you about this. The announcement today is one that has been heralded by the Prime Minister Carney and his government now since they were elected. And I think there's any number of us in the community that have been eagerly awaiting the actual sort of start point and understanding what was going to be included. The impetus for this comes from consistent and perennial complaints that defense procurement in Canada, and frankly echoed in many countries around the world, is too slow, doesn't deliver the capabilities that the Canadian Forces needs, and when it does, they tend to be more expensive and not necessarily fit for purpose. The Government of Canada has tried on a number of occasions, different governments, to reform defense procurement, to take another look at how it is that we acquire things. And in fact, last when I was in the Assistant Deputy Minister Materiel in the Defense Department, under the government of Prime Minister Harper, there was a defense procurement strategy at that point, which also endeavored to try and address the right equipment for the Canadian Forces at the right time. But what is different about Canadian procurement, defense procurement, from many of our allies is that we have divided up the responsibility for it between a number of different departments. So we have the Defense Department, the Canadian Forces, the armed forces themselves, who are responsible for defining what capabilities are needed. We have the Department now of Public Services and Procurement Canada, formerly Public Works, that's responsible for the procurement process, the contracting. We have what was Industry Canada, ISED, that is responsible for the application of industrial technological benefit, so offsets, economic benefit for Canada. We have the Treasury Board, which sets the overall policies for procurement and provides a supervisory role, if I can describe it as such, over every decision, particularly and specifically for major capital procurements. The end result of this is a lot of inefficiency in moving these files back and forth and a tremendous amount of committee effort and engagement that is, and just to be clear, it's not only the bureaucratic process that is the problem for many Canadian capital projects, but it does contribute to lengthening processes, to making it more difficult to come to a decision, to present decisions to government that can be made in a timely way with the information that's needed in order to have an efficient program management. It's a long explanation, but the result of all of these identified problems over many years is that the Prime Minister Carney's government had announced that it was going to create a single agency. And what we got today is an announcement of what that agency is supposed to look, well, at least we know what it's supposed to do. We don't yet know exactly how it's going to do it, but we do know that it is supposed to deliver the right capability at the right time. It's supposed to maximize economic benefits for Canada, to focus on the investment in defense production, and it's supposed to get the right skill sets into the Canadian government that will allow all of this to happen.
Well, that was a great rundown, Wendy, and I think it'll be really helpful for our listeners. Now, we've spoken about the impetus as well as some of the potential benefits for such an agency, but we are essentially seeing the creation of an entirely new government agency here. Are there any potential challenges or obstacles that you could foresee in the development of the agency and its impact on efficiency and ongoing projects?
So I am not inside the process, so I can't say exactly how it is going to transpire. But I do understand that the intent of this new agency is to get it stood up as quickly as possible. They have announced a gentleman from the private sector with a background in capital investments, Doug Guzman, that is going to run it, and that they are going to use existing skill sets within the various departments. So as I understand, there will be some experts who will come from ISED, there will be some experts who will come from DND, and they will have the bulk of the procurement expertise that is focused on major capital acquisitions from PSPC, and it will be housed within PSPC. That's what I understand at the moment. I also think they're going to be hiring talent from outside government, which is absolutely necessary when you look at the tremendous complexity that is involved in contracting for hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of activity. I also understand that this new agency is going to focus on a few number of large procurements that are just getting underway in order not to disturb the activity that is already either under contract or well along the process. And I think there is a recognition on the part of the government that they don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that they need to keep what's underway going while understanding that we have a tremendous an expansion in scope for Canadian defence acquisitions coming, for capital investment in the Canadian Armed Forces, because of the move to 2% of GDP in year and the subsequent effort to get to 5% of GDP over the course of the next 10 years.
Wendy, I think, it probably wouldn't be too controversial to say that over the past 15 to 20 years, Canada has often been accused of being a laggard when it comes to defense, not taking defense seriously enough, and that we're kind of coasting on our reputation as a nation that punches well above our weight in defense. That said, we've seen this Carney government just in the past few months make many announcements about defense spending, developing new defense agencies. To you, does this seem like it could potentially be a turning point in how Canada approaches defense, or do we need to still wait and see how things roll out?
Well, I'm going to give you sort of my perspective on the situation, which is that I am very pleased that the government has recognized the need to put considerable investment into Canada's defense and security. And I like to believe that it's not because others complained about us, it's not because of our reputation, it's because of a recognition that the world is a fundamentally more insecure and unstable, unpredictable. We are in a more unstable and unpredictable place than we have been for many, many years. And that we are recognizing that we need to take steps to address our own security needs and not rely quite so heavily on being part of others' alliances. And, I even when I was at NATO, I did not subscribe to the, pillorying Canada because our overall investment was so low a percentage of our GDP. I said then, and I continue to say now, that we always needed to do more. It would have been great if we'd done more, but we're getting there now and we're doing the right thing, in my view. That said, it's not going to be easy. It's a change in mindset. We will not have seen this level of defense investment in Canada since we were fighting the Korean War. We have not seen this level of direct engagement in Canadian defense industry, frankly, since the Second World War. And it's not going to be easy to get to where we need to go. But I would like to hope that we have a broad base of support across not only the political spectrum, but in Canada, across the Canadian public, in order to get there. And this is, the government has decided to go this particular way. And I believe, honestly, that we all have to try and get behind it and help to the best we can. That being said, it's not going to be easy. There are bureaucratic hurdles. There are supply chain hurdles. There are many different countries pursuing the same types of capabilities right now and trying to build their own defense capabilities domestically and in concert with others. And I'd like to have seen us get to where we are now a few years ago, but we're here now. We've just got to keep going with it.
When you did mention alliances and defense spending, I'm wondering if you think this new agency, the DIA, has any implications for Canada's efforts to integrate from a defense perspective more with Europe through the Rearm Europe efficiency, and if this helps us in any way get closer to our stated goal of reaching 2% by the end of the fiscal year and eventually 5%, or if you just generally have any broader comments on these two initiatives as they are.
Yeah. There are only, slightly less than 2 quarters left in this fiscal year. So I don't think that this agency is going to be directly involved in our getting to 2% by March 31st, 2026. That work is already underway in different areas, and frankly, we just need to get on with it. I do think that it will play a major role in our getting to 3.5% in direct expenditure and 1.5% in dual-use infrastructure, as was decided upon by the NATO summit this past summer. So that's a good thing. I see that as whatever we can do to speed things up and to get on with things, that's a good thing. Now, getting involved in the European Rearm process, deciding which allies to work with, making sure that we have thought through the risks and the benefits to multinational engagement versus direct procurement solely for Canada is something that's going to be more than just this agency. It's a fundamental question of our defense policy and engagements as it is our foreign policy. And one of the things that the press release said today is that this agency is going to assist in our engagement with key allies. Ideally, it will provide one consistent voice in engagement with like organizations in other governments. And the press release specifically mentioned Australia, France, and the UK all having similar agencies. So one of the things we just have to keep in mind is that those 3 agencies, the Australian, French, and British, are all within their defense department. So this new agency is going to have to work out how we speak with one consistent voice when certainly it may be responsible for one aspect of our acquisition, but our overall defense relationships and foreign policy arrangements are the purview of other departments still. And what I guess I would say in my overall sentiment is it doesn't matter where you draw a boundary around a particular activity in any large organization, government specifically, there will always be people outside of that boundary. So figuring out early on how you're going to speak with one voice, engage with others that have a direct stake in the activities, and making sure that there is one consistent effort is going to be crucial. And I guess the last thing I would say is that one of the biggest developments in today's announcement is that we will have one minister, who is the Secretary of State, but Minister Fuhr, who has been tasked with making this happen. we haven't had one single member of cabinet or associate member of cabinet. I don't know where the secretaries of state stand at the moment, but we haven't had one political actor responsible for delivery in a very long time. Not, frankly, I think, since the possibly since the Second World War. Others may know better. But Minister Fure is tasked and has said he is going to deliver. And I think we all need to watch very carefully and help where we can to make sure he's able to do that.
Can you set the scene for what the current state of Canada's defence industrial base looks like? What current issues exist within it that necessitate consideration of adopting a national, more comprehensive defence industrial strategy?
All right. So I would say that Canada's current defense industrial base, and even sort of defining that is a little bit tricky because it goes beyond simply the companies involved, but also the policy and the regulatory environment within which they operate. I would say it's probably about as good as can be expected given our traditional sort of patterns of procurement and the general size of our military. And also the kinds of things that we've done over the years as a country with the Canadian Armed Forces. And by that, I mean that, by virtue of sort of the policy antecedent of our alignment with the U.S. and our position within NATO, there are certain, elements of the defense industrial base and certain companies that we have, I think, encouraged and consequently have quite good capabilities in. But there's other areas where we've, relied on our allies or made conscious decisions or simply drifted into patterns where we haven't really made a lot of investments. And so as a consequence, the kind of the defense industrial ecosystem is weaker in those areas. And of course, on top of all of that is the fact that, we're in a period of significant, technological change. And so there are all of a sudden a bunch of sort of new areas of defense capability where, they're dual use. They're in some cases are coming directly out of sort of civil developments, some of the AI and machine learning technologies we see, cybersecurity to an extent, significant networking, cloud computing. A lot of those technologies are coming out of sectors where there hasn't really been a huge amount of Canadian involvement whatsoever, except on the civil side. So I say that the overall picture is patchy. It performs in some areas, and it underperforms or does not exist in others. And so that kind of gets to the second question around, where does that leave a defense industrial strategy? I think ultimately, as I try to point out in the paper, it really highlights the importance of choices. And so there has to be a bit of a survey of where the industry is and a very kind of an honest, clear-eyed look at what we're good at and what we're not good at, and where we want to invest our money and where we're going to get the best, economic benefits out of it. And then, adjust the strategy to that. Because for sure, if we just adjust it to either where we are today and solely those things and where we're comfortable, or we don't take a look at the future, then we're going to be missing opportunities and we're going to be missing chances to really make a defense industrial strategy perform the way it probably should.
What would you say are the main gaps that currently exist in Canada's industrial capacity to deliver on its defense needs?
I think that that's a tricky question because, again, it implies that some things are more important than others. And ultimately, that's really kind of it's a policy-driven question, and it's a sort of a sovereign aspirational question. But what I can say is that there are a few areas that are probably collectively holding the defense industry back. One of those areas, on the regulatory and process side, I think we're starting to see some moves. Just simply the idea that the country's ability to set requirements and to procure and to have a kind of a smart industrial engagement, that's an area where we're deficient. And so obviously the government is committed to closing that. In terms of specific technology areas, one of the big areas is defense computing, secure network architectures, information exchange. when we think about the new generation of weapon systems that are coming on board, they are overwhelmingly, massively data-driven platforms. And unfortunately, Canada has not to this point invested either on the defense side or in sort of high security computing generally in the kinds of network architecture, the network structures, in some cases, the hardware that's going to be required, simply interconnecting the bases. Those are huge, sort of factors in building a kind of a resilient, capable, 21st century military. And we've really been lagging in that particular area to the point that it now becomes a kind of a pacing function. Even if you're buying very advanced equipment, if you can't integrate it in, you don't have the data architecture, the information management architectures, to use it, then obviously you're taking on more risk and adding more expense. I think there's also a lot of concern about, sort of sovereign capability. And we hear a lot about that. Canada has to be able to exercise greater sovereignty. I think there are practical limits. I mean, as long as you are buying, pieces of technology from other countries, the reality is that there are going to probably be some elements of those that you're not necessarily going to have perfect sovereignty. And we're talking about really complex supply chains that in many cases, nobody has sovereignty over. I mean, if the boards or the chips are coming from Taiwan or from, other suppliers around the world, there's a degree of vulnerability anyways. But I think from a Canadian standpoint, we really have to decide, okay, what are the things or the actions that we can take that will improve our net sovereignty and then sink our money into those? So things like really making sure that we buy the intellectual property, that we get the repair and overhaul capabilities, and that we build Canadian industry around those. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm coming from the perspective of, someone who works in training and readiness. I think sovereign training systems and the ability to manage the data, hold the data, use the data well, I think those are, like those are a red line. We absolutely have to have that. As you get into some of the more esoteric and more specialized weapon system areas, missile technology, certain types of guidance technology, advanced manufacturing around, sensor modules and things like that, then it becomes more of a balancing act, and it becomes more of a, okay, is where we buy it more important than whether we build it or make it here? Some of those intergovernmental relationships become a way of guaranteeing that sovereignty. But ultimately, net industrial capacity has to be something that is looked at as a driver of sovereign advantage. And so we need to just make choices there as well.
Now, keeping this in mind, how might today's announcement of the creation of a Canadian Defence Investment Agency play a role in making Canadian industrial strategy more effective?
Mm-hmm. I think today's announcement is entirely inconsequential and also critical. So and I say that a little bit tongue in cheek because I think not just as a defense professional, as people in the military, as Canadians writ large, I think we're pretty jaded about announcements nowadays. Like there's been a lot of announcements, over the past 10 or 15 years about new and fantastic things. I think what really matters is what are the actual muscle movements that we have seen leading up to the announcement? And now what are the things that we are going to see rolling out of it? And so I think there's some, again, like I say in the paper, there's some encouraging early signs. There's been some there's been some quality work. I think the consultation in some respects has been weak and deficient. But at the same time, there have been other engagements that have been very positive. And I think the degree to which we see industry representation growing, sort of pre-program, in engagement with the Defense Industry Advisory Group and in the continuous capability sustainment working groups, those are actual sort of, muscle movements that are starting to set up a defense industrial strategy for execution. And those are not just limited to, people from the defense industry or sort of the traditional defense industry. We have the Conference Board of Canada releasing its paper on defense industrial strategy, and, previously. So I think there's a lot of really valuable engagement from a bunch of quarters. Now, I think the question is, what is the next tranche of major muscle movements that we're going to see, and how quickly are they going to come? And that includes a whole series of things like, obviously the big ticket and the marquee items are program decisions and announcements. If we start seeing a bunch of additional strategic partnering initiatives emerge, if we see Canada making some very clear early platform selections, potentially selection of prime contractors and Canadian significant Canadian participation at a subcontractor or a prime contract level, how quickly we see the transition from the PSPC, the existing sort of procurement structure, into this newly formed organization, and what sort of initial legislative moves they feel are necessary to get the agency off the ground. I think that's going to be sort of the near-term indicator of how important this is. And of course, this is all taking place in the context of the fall economic, the budget release and sort of what that is going to mean for our plans to get to 2% and then move beyond. I think sometimes when you're talking about defense procurement, and certainly for anybody who's been working in it for anything, for a number of years, like it's easy to kind of get a little bit depressed. And similarly, working in Ottawa, particularly if you work in a policy shop or you're in one of the major departments, you may not have necessarily a very clear idea of what the capacity in this country really is. And I guess, like, I just sort of maybe share a perspective with you. Like in the Second World War, we trained 130,000 Allied aircrew. We were the largest, trainer of aircrew anywhere in the entire alliance. In Canada, we built 16,000 aircraft, 50,000 tanks, 40,000 field guns. We built 800 major and minor warships. We supplied 40% of the aluminum to the war effort and 95% of the nickel. When you go and stand in any company in the Montreal aerospace cluster, within 50 kilometers of where you're standing lies all the technology that you need to build almost every aircraft imaginable and any advanced vehicle imaginable. I mean, this country has massive capacity. If we start making smart choices about the sectors of the industry we can advance, we absolutely can be a world leader, as we are in other technology areas and in other industrial areas. The fact that we have a relatively small defense-only economy in Canada in no way limits companies who are given the right level of support and who can achieve export success, which of course is absolutely one of the intended concepts behind a defense investment agency. It's not simply buying stuff, and it's not even simply buying stuff from Canadian companies. It's building the climate and building the industrial ecosystem that then allows Canada and a range of Canadian companies to compete better in a heavily distorted but also extremely profitable world stage. And so, yeah, I'm super optimistic because I've seen what we can do with my own eyes. I've lived it throughout my career. I see it in dealing with any number of companies, not just my own. And I believe in Canadian know-how.
To close out this week's episode, we'll turn to Ugurhan Berkok, who's a defense economist with RMC and Queen's University. Ugur's been a longtime friend and collaborator of the Institute, so it's great to have him on the program for the first time. As a note, and for some context, this part of the podcast with Ugur was recorded a few weeks ago, so obviously ahead of yesterday's recent announcement, and that should be considered when listening to this portion of the podcast.
I'm wondering if you might be able to discuss what you know about the forthcoming defense industrial strategy. Maybe you could touch on what our current system looks like and what might be needed as part of a strategy. So that's a very big question, but I'll let you take it away.
I think given the urgency of the situation, I think that extra money we should be close to 2% at the end of the year if the current government carries it out, because they said so. Before the changes to defense industrial strategy, I think that there will have to be the recruitment personnel, as well as acquiring the platforms and the munitions and all that necessary to sort of achieve some sort of readiness. Increasing to 3.5%, probably will take a couple of years. Well, I mean, I think the prime ministers said quite a few years. It's not a couple of years. So I split the question into two. One is the readiness, operational readiness for the forces. I'm hearing there will be further deployment than Latvia. I think I heard the word Poland. I don't think we are there, but to be able to deploy beyond our current deployment on Latvia, I can think that the people are scrambling in the Defense Department, our defense planners. Now, in terms of tweaking our defense industrial strategy, I think it's going to take some time. It came as a complete surprise to me that the new prime minister suddenly in May talked about the reorientation in terms of procurement and defense industrial base towards Europe. That is no small thing. So it's going to take a while, and perhaps we can discuss further, but I mean, it has to be discussed further, all stakeholders. It's going to take a lot of adjustment to our current defense industrial strategy. As we know, we about 12, 13 years ago, we determined the KICs, key industrial capabilities, too wide to be defense. They threw in certain industries that have only oblique relations to defense. They have to go. Also, if we are hoping to reorient our acquisitions towards Europe, and vice versa, in particular vice versa, because if we want our industries to develop, well, we have to look towards the European market. So that requires an update on our trade relationship with Europe. Europeans will not open their markets unless we open our market. So implications. In my mind, the first thing is ITBs will have to be dropped vis-a-vis our relationship with Europe. Why should they? Because that's protection. If they open their markets to us, we have to open our market to them. So we have a lot of thinking to do in terms of joining Europe. It's going to be beneficial because, in a sense, they are countries our size, our level. So, but I mean, I think these are just facts ahead of us. Personally, I still think it's going to be way better for us if we can achieve an integration or at least opening up to the European defense industrial base and vice versa. Just like in any trade relationship, well, it opens up possibilities for our successful sectors in the first place to export. So a lot of sectors exposed to European competition will complain. So in a nutshell, just like in any trade deal, like we like it or not, there will be winners and losers from the industry. But overall, like in any move towards freer trade, I expect we're going to win overall.
Would you be able to talk a little bit more about a defense industrial strategy, what objectives it might need to prioritize in order to be successful from your vantage point and understanding?
I think it's always desirable to support the operational readiness of your force. In that regard, I always admire the Australians. They are I always call it it's a very rough neighborhood. So if it works for them, it should work for us in our neighborhood, which is not well. I mean, there is trouble close by, all right, but that's not like a enemy threat. So let me give you one little example. In their defense industrial strategies, they prioritize not by sector, but by operational readiness. So to support your defense force, you have to have ready some sectors to enable your defense force to sort of with readiness. So the example I want to use here, I often found it difficult to discuss for example, the shipbuilding. Well, here we go. We are 40% over budget compared to what you can sort of the cost at which you can buy your frigates, whereas Australians are buying at least part of their ships now, is recently announced, from Japan. So operational readiness does not include those big platforms which you cannot produce overnight. Service, I mean, the in-service requirements have to be there for operational readiness. So we have to understand that what we have to do here is completely oriented towards operational readiness. Quite correctly, people remind us during Afghanistan we ran out of munitions. Well, the solution was years ago. Well, we have a munitions supply system which falls short of actual requirements now. When we were in Afghanistan, it fell short. Just to give you an example, for example, the Brits. We're still talking about operational readiness. Brits chose a principal agent, BAE Systems, and BAE Systems, at any given time, they have contingent contracts with 5 different munition suppliers. If one falls short, the other one will, but you don't have to have, and in that case, you see, not every supplier has to be in Britain. So the moving forward, operational readiness as of this past year it has become even more of an urgency.
Before we wrap up the podcast, we can focus a bit more on Canada potentially joining Rearm Europe. What kind of expansion or modernizing efforts would need to take place in Canada's own defense industry in order to be able to contribute in some meaningful way to the initiative?
If we want to integrate in terms of defense industrial base, then we have to know where we have, this is the big expression in economics, where is our comparative advantage? In which fields in the defense industries field, which ones have a chance of exporting? So presumably are companies that are not competitive, whether in terms of quality or the cost, they might cry foul. But the free trade always creates winners and losers. So I'm sure in our industrial base, defense industrial base, there are companies ready to export. Earlier you pointed out they may have a capacity problem, because if you're only supplying the needs for the Canadian Defence Force, well then if you open up to Europe, well, to be able to export, then you have to expand. So part of the new Defence Procurement Agency agenda also has to include some measures to, if necessary. I hate to use the term subsidy, but they may need some expansion seed money. I can see that happening. But that's part of, well, I mean, whether you can subsidize, that's a different thing, because that's going to fall under any enlargement of our trade deal with Europe. But those are real potential problems. If our defense industrial base is not able to sell that much, well, you have two choices: just shut down or just expand. I don't want to end without mentioning Airbus 220 aircraft. Well, that was the Bombardier C series. Well, surely it's a successful product from our aerospace sector. And let's not forget, Bombardier received over decades a lot of seed money, a lot of subsidy. So you may need that within the trade agreements. So when we open up, we're going to open the books in terms of the European Union-Canada trade agreement. It's going to be enlarged. I can't see it otherwise. You cannot talk about integrating the defense industrial bases without properly setting up the scene for the two-way trade.
And that's all for today's episode. If you want to learn more about the CDA Institute, follow us on social media, visit our website at cdainstitute.ca, or subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates on Canadian defense and international security. If you have comments or feedback about what you heard in today's edition, email Josh at cdainstitute.ca. I'm Josh Malm. Until next time.